Oh my God, I am so fed up with these woke movies. That was sarcasm, if you couldn't tell. Welcome to Cinematic Conversations with me, myself, and I, the show where I discuss movies, the film industry, and honestly, whatever strikes my fancy. I'm Lauren, and today I will be discussing politics and movies and how they intersect. Today's episode is brought to you by me and my visiting guest, Nami the cat. Cute. If you would like to support me, please consider subscribing, and if you want to support me monetarily, you can check out my Buy Me a Coffee, which will be linked down below. Thank you so much. First things first. What does political even mean? Per Merriam-Webster, political, 1, A, of relating to government, a government, or the conduct of government, B, of relating to or concerned with the making as distinguished from the administration of governmental policy, 2, of relating to, involving, or involved in politics, and especially party politics, 3, organized in governmental terms, 4, involving or charged or concerned with acts against a government or political system. However, if we look into the history of the word, it actually used to be expansive enough to include beyond government and governmental systems because it was just the general regulation of social behavior. This understanding of the word political has trickled down in some ways. For instance, we call things politically correct or not, which really is in line with social behavior and what we consider to be acceptable socially versus a governmental idea. And we use the term politically correct usually in terms of, oh, that's not politically correct, and that it might be offensive or hurt someone or a group of people, and that could be a word or an action that could be politically correct or not. Also, please remember that being political or the term political is not inherently good or bad. The term is usually thrown around negatively or in a derogatory way, but in my opinion, being interested in how society functions and runs is a good thing. I personally disagree with a lot of people's political views, but I don't think being political is bad. In fact, because I am invested as a person who lives in society and I do care, I advocate for the political views that I personally want to promote. For example, women's reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. Go women. And really anybody with the uterus, let's be real. Now we've addressed what political is, let's go into art as politics. Every art form, honestly, is used for political meanings. Art is a reflection and a result of literally being alive. So they encapsulate, in a way, where the artist was, who the artist was, how they lived, when they lived, why they lived, how they lived. Don't forget, art has existed since the beginning of humankind, way back to cave paintings. So art is nothing new here, and neither is political art. From its origin, art tells stories. Art exists to inform and inspire and educate, entertain, and do so many things. One of which is being political. Art is about way more than being just beautiful. In fact, a lot of art is disturbing and really, really hard to look at. And I admit, my favorite artist is Claude Monet. You may know him from the Water Lilies. So it's not like I'm some high uppity horse here. Like, my favorite artist is an artist who paints pretty aesthetically pleasing things. My favorite painting is also what I consider to be a classically beautiful painting. It's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and it just depicts this beautiful young woman in this gorgeous dress. I'm obsessed with the fabric and how they painted it, just stunning. But that doesn't stop me from exploring other genres of art, other types of work, other artists, and the stuff that they're creating. It does mean, however, that I hang in my house will be something more like the water lily paintings, a little more basic, and that's okay. It's okay to like basic, beautiful art. We just shouldn't be avoiding art that we don't necessarily think is aesthetically pleasing in a conventional sense, just because we don't want to deal with any kind of emotional turmoil that the painting is going to give us. The focus of this episode is on film and TV in a sense, but we're really going to talk about movies. And by we, I mean me, myself, and I, right? That's the we I'm talking about. But we're going to start with a couple famous pieces of art that are relatively political in different forms, just to, get our minds churning and start thinking like, oh, art really can be political. Now, this is a pretty easy one to see how it's political. If we think about the political cartoon drawing from Benjamin Franklin from 1754, Join or Die. This was to promote the colonies to unite against the French, and it's literally like, join or die, fight with us or die. That to me is like pretty obviously political. even though you might think, oh, well, that's a cartoon. That's art, right? That's art. Then we have the painting Liberty Leading the People from 1830 by Eugene Delacroix. And this painting commemorates the July Revolution that ultimately removed Charles X from the throne, kaboot him. And its main character is Liberty personified. Again, this is, about a war, a battle. Easy to see how it's political. We're starting with a lot of war themes here. We've got Rosie the Riveter from 1942 by J. Howard Miller. Now, though there's the kind of spun Rosie the Riveter, I would say this Rosie the Riveter poster really rallied American women during and after World War II. Along with promoting the war effort, it also kind of instigated women to be more autonomous and independent. Or maybe I should have picked less war, but I think it's just easier to understand. We have Pablo Picasso's A Massacre in Korea from 1950. And this painting is really critiquing America's role in the Korean War by depicting the violence thrust upon its citizens. So as you can see here, this is a negative depiction of war, right? Versus the other ones have been a little more positive. Then we have Norman Rockwell's The Problem We All Live With from 1964. This one is a very famous painting, so you may have seen it. You probably have seen it. In fact, you may have seen all of these. And this is a very explicit painting depicting racism in America, with the reality that Ruby Bridges literally needed federal protection in order to go to school as a child because the schools were segregated. So that's about racism, not war, still political. Then we have the Guerrilla Girls group poster, Do Women Have to Be Naked to Get into the Met Museum? And that's from 1989. Obviously, the painting I talked about earlier is not a naked woman, but this poster was highlighting the statistics about how few of the artists with work at the Met are women compared to if we see a nude of a person, how many of those are women. And the results are really kind of staggering and depressing, honestly. We can't go talking about political art without talking about propaganda. Obviously, a bunch of the pieces I talked about just now were propaganda, but we have to remember that that does still make it art. Many famous pieces of art in history were created not just to highlight or emphasize political issues and move on, but for campaigns that had very specific goals in mind. Propaganda, again, we think of typically, I feel like, in a negative sense, but really it's just about spreading ideas and information or rumors. Not so good. And these can be used to either help your cause and your social issue or to hinder your opponent and their cause and their social issue. In my opinion, again, this doesn't take away from the value of the art overall. It's just more context when we think about why this art was created, who it was made for, why it was made. It's really key, in my opinion, to remember that art and creating art takes time and money. So someone has to be paying for the art. Usually, it could be an artist doing it themselves, and that's, maybe is less likely to be propaganda. But if an artist is being commissioned to do a piece of work, for example, the Rosie the Riveter poster, J. Howard Miller was commissioned to make those. Money is absolutely involved, and that economic power translates to social and political power. We've discussed some traditional art forms, so now it's time to talk about why we need political cinema explicitly. We need political art as a whole. But I think in today's society, movies and TV are critical to convey messages to audiences around the world. They are one of the easiest ways, I think, to effectively communicate ideas because of how visual the medium is. Yes, dialogue is obviously important, but the language of film is not the language in the film. And the language of film itself, with its cuts and how we see expressions and juxtaposition, and then we can also include some sound and score and the atmosphere, the ambience of the film can convey so much without understanding what's going on literally. You can, I think, feel something. For instance, in a lot of war movies, there's usually an opponent, two sides, and typically one side speaking English, even if they're not actually speaking English, but just for the English audience, and the other side speaking their actual language. And even when you're hearing that other language and you're hearing the screams or they're saying something, you can hear usually anger or terror or something. And you don't need to understand a language to understand what those people in the movie are going through. Again, these messages that are being conveyed and promoted could be subjectively or objectively good or bad. I'm going to say it so many times, but politics / being political does not automatically equal good or bad. As I kind of alluded to earlier, regardless of when the plot of the film takes place, movies reflect the time they were made. This is because of the people who are creating them. For example, you wouldn't have seen a Bridgerton show with its very extreme colorblind casting made in the actual Regency period. Not that they had TV shows, but you understand me. Because of this, you're going to find movies that promote all different political viewpoints, and they can be received really differently from the box office, socially, and critically. And this really just depends on the angle that the film is using. For example, The Sound of Freedom from 2023, which is a film that arguably sensationalizes child trafficking in South America, did honestly reasonably well at the box office, but it was socially and critically a bomb. Now, its budget was about $14.5 million, and it did make almost $250 million. So, box office success, maybe, but it scored a 57% on Rotten Tomatoes and 36% on Metacritic. So, thumbs down from the movie sphere versus Barbie from 2023 as well, highlighted our patriarchal society and gender expectations and norms and kind of battling against those. And that was a slam dunk, across the board. Not only did it bring in over $1.4 billion at the box office, which is just mind-blowing number, deserved, but mind-blowing. Its budget was $140 million, so huge success. It has an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes and an 80% on Metacritic. Now, obviously, Barbie as a concept is also kind of more fun, right? Like a movie about a doll versus a movie about human trafficking. So we have to keep that in mind. But I do think in the correct social climate, people are more receptive to gender norms being battled against than a bunch of maybe white rich people funding a film dramatizing something happening in South America and making sort of themselves the heroes. That movie was also allegedly linked to QAnon, so not it from a bigger perspective picture. I'm now going to go into some explicit and subjectively implicit political films. I will try to go over kind of just their basis for why I think they're political, but I'm not going to go in depth analysis on each film because that would take 10,000 years. If you want me to really dive into one of these films, let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can make happen. All my examples as well will be feature length, but there are a plethora of political short films out there. I just figured less people might have heard about them, and I tried to pick movies that maybe some of you have heard, maybe not all of them, but a mix of them, just to really hit home how mainstream political film is, even though I think a lot of people don't realize it. So we'll start with the explicit political films. Now, I think they're explicitly political because they're widely believed to be political. They're accepted to be political as such, and they're going to be on different political views. Now, the first one is from 1915, which is very early, right? The beginning of film was in the early 1900s. And this is D.W. Griffith's The Birth of the Nation, which was a 3-hour epic, which promoted the Ku Klux Klan, really. It's hard to say that's not political. It made justification for prejudice and racism and discrimination against Black people in America, which we do not approve of. At least Lauren does not approve of. But the film was very popular for its time. A lot of professors at film school talked about the movie in a positive way from its craft perspective, but, the plot, the message is politically incorrect. And I also have refused to watch the whole movie because I do not need to be engaging with that sort of rhetoric, personally. Creeping along, 10 years later, we have the 1925 battleship Potemkin from Sergei Eisenstein. This is an explicit propaganda film that used experimental montage techniques to promote socialist ideas of the Bolsheviks, basically. And this is famous for the Odessa step sequence, especially where we have a bunch of innocent and unarmed civilians getting mauled, basically, by militant and ruthless Cossacks. And this includes the famous, woman losing her eye, being shot at, the baby carriage going down the steps, and the baby ultimately dying. I will include a couple clips, images, but it is really hard to watch. One thing I thought was really interesting is Eisenstein made sure that this crowd included people with disabilities, children, the elderly, people all across the board. It wasn't just like the stereotypical women and children. Then we have Olympia from 1938. This was by Leni Riefenstahl, and this is a sports documentary that promoted Nazi Germany during their Berlin Olympics. Now, today it's pretty much accepted to be a propaganda film because it really is highlighting, or supposed to be highlighting, the strength of Germany, which we know, if you know 1938, what was going on in Germany at that time. But it is also known in the film world for its very incredible cinematography. And I agree, some of the shots, especially the diving, is insane. But we can't take away from the fact that what is this movie trying to say? And it is very positive for the Nazis, which we are not positive about. We do not like Nazis. We're going to take a bit of a jump in time, and we're going to go to 1967 for Frederick Wiseman's The Titicaca Follies. Now, this was filmed in 1966 at the Bridgewater State Hospital for the criminally insane in Massachusetts. So this is a bit of an experimental documentary, and it really pretty ruthlessly and without any kind of polish depicted the inhumane and really brutal treatment of the inmates. And I think it's notable that Massachusetts legislators worked really hard to try to suppress this film. So that one's a bit different, really talking about mental health issues and how we as a society treat those with mental illnesses. Then we have the 1982 film Koyaanisqatsi, I cannot pronounce it, Koyaanisqatsi by Godfrey Reggio. And I watched this in school and I was really blown away. Again, this is an experimental documentary, and it really reveals humanity's negative impact on the natural world by comparing how humans, like we have nature doing all these things, and then we have humanity also replicating those things with our own tech, basically, that's taking over, right? We have, like, say, a root system between trees, and then we have this really immense road system. And those roads are built on land that trees used to grow on, right? It's really also known, I think, for its incredible score by Philip Glass. Taking another jump in time, we have the 2000 film Persepolis, based off the autobiography book Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi and Vincent Perrinaud. Now, this is based off Satrapi's book. Vincent Perrinaud did not write the book. He just helped with the movie. This was a graphic novel that was about growing up with the Iranian Revolution. And the film is animated and in the style of the graphic novel, which I think is fascinating and really well done. And to be clear, this is a black and white style, which according to Satrapi, and I really love this, shows how any country can become like Iran, right? Because we don't have any kind of colors to show sort of where we are. There's just people, and people exist all over the world. To round out more modern, explicit political films, again, this is just an example. There are so many more. We have Ava DuVernay's 13th from 2016. This is a raw look at racism and incarceration in America, which is the prison industrial complex. The title comes from the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which is the one that abolished slavery in America, except if it's used as a punishment for convicted criminals. This is important because it really is highlighting how slavery is just not abolished. And when you watch the documentary, which if you haven't seen it, you absolutely should, it is really eye-opening, or at least it was really eye-opening for me when I watched it. Now we're going to talk about some more implicit political films. In my opinion, these movies are honestly like pretty political, but people across the board don't seem to agree, both people I've spoken to and when I was snooping on Reddit, which is obviously the source of all truth. It's Reddit, right? I think you might just like guffaw at this one, but this is a series and it would be Star Wars. Now, this is something that people don't think is political or woke because you have a lot of people complaining about how Star Wars used to be, not political, not woke, etc. Now we have like women basically in more lead roles. But it's always been political. In episode 4, we have the evil Galactic Empire and the Rebel Alliance, and our heroes are the rebels, right? We're always on the side of the rebels when it comes to these Star Wars movies because we hate the Empire. The Empire is evil, they are exploitative, they take over resources, they kick people out of their homes, they destroy things. And who does the Empire represent? It represents America. It represents the political Western world of colonization and exploitation. So that's pretty political to me, and to a lot of people, but somehow not everyone. Like, it feels like a lot of people miss, like, the main point of Star Wars, which is literally pitting democracy versus dictatorship, right? This pitting of democracy and dictatorship is really evident with the prequel series and Chancellor Palpatine, who literally represents Hitler, because he was the chancellor in Germany. Literally, for reasons unbeknownst to me, so many people on the internet just don't understand this or see this or agree with it. And if you are one of those people, tell me in the comments like why you believe Star Wars is not political in that regard. Because like we're not even talking about the newer Star Wars movies, and like the old ones are political, like right there, really explicitly, in my opinion. But again, because of this section, they're implicit. In a really similar vein, we have the Hunger Games series, which I'm kind of keeping as like almost a sub bullet under Star Wars, because it's really similar in how we have our rebellious heroes versus the oppressive capital. And we're on the side of the rebels, right? Like we want them to destroy the capital because the capital is, again, bad. It exploits people. It is not considerate. It doesn't care who's starving or struggling as long as the capital is happy and having fun and living their glamorous life. Again, who does the capital represent? They represent, like in these Western world powers, it represents America. And yet, people I know who are Americans, when they watch it, they want the capital destroyed, right? We are on the side of Katniss. And it's like, take a step back, baby. See the bigger picture. We are the capital. We have easy access to food, clothes, lots of fun things, really on the backs of people who are really far away that we'll never see or have to interact with. On a whole, right? That's a generalization, but in the terms of how I think people view the Hunger Games, I think it's a valid point. Then we have Independence Day from 1996 by Roland Emmerich. And this, I think, is pretty political, even though I think a lot of people may not agree because they're like, oh, well, there's an alien. Like, it's obviously not real. And it's like, yes, it's about an alien crisis. But who saves the day? America. Who in America saves the day? A military pilot and the president of the United States. Like, are you kidding me? And there's an amazing speech, by the way. Like, I love that speech. This movie makes me feel really patriotic. And that's the point of the movie, right? Like, it's literally about how the military and political might of America saves the world. That is political. Like, you cannot tell me that's not political. Also, Avatar from 2009, again, with the aliens thing. People seem to think that when you take aliens or sci-fi or otherworldly, like, it no longer could all apply to the real world. And again, I do think this is a movie that a lot of people do agree is political, but there's still that camp that just doesn't agree. And it leaves my jaw on the floor because this movie is explicitly, in my opinion, about colonization, exploitation of resources, and literally like ruthless treatment of indigenous people. Then we have The Wolf of Wall Street from 2013. This is a film that depicts the true story of Jordan Belfort and his money laundering schemes, his investment fraud, etc. Again, not everyone thinks this is a political movie. They think it's sort of making some sort of, social statement. But I think it is political because it really reveals to me how people are able to exploit others with knowledge and supported backing. Jordan Belfort and the other Wall Street dudes are able to take advantage of people who have less access to knowledge and resources. And they're able to do that because of the lack of regulations in the system. And, though people try to make new rules and regulations for Wall Street, there's always politicians trying to make less rules and regulations for the money, to make more money in the economy. And I think that makes it political. So you'll be thinking, Lauren, do you think all movies are political? And my honest answer is yes. A lot of movies don't have any obvious messages though, Lauren. Like they're just for fun, they're just for entertainment. Get off your high horse. And I have a couple responses to that. The first being, a film doesn't need to have an obvious message to have a message or a political slant. And secondly, are you sure there isn't a message? I know that the whole, maybe the curtain is just blue and they're not depressed from the whole, the why are the curtains blue has radically, destroyed media literacy and analysis of art. But, maybe the curtains are blue for a reason. Also, if a movie is almost explicitly avoiding a political statement, again, that is a political statement, right? Because they're not trying to cause any controversy. They don't want to lose support from someone, basically, which is a political choice. Let's dig deeper into some culturally and socially favorite movies, right? X-Men is about diversity and inclusion, and Magneto also clearly addresses anti-Semitism. Avengers is an American military strength and power propaganda movie and series, which, by the way, is made fun of with The Boys, the TV show. We have the Godfather films, which address corrupt politicians and crime families. The Shawshank Redemption is about prisons. Inception emphasizes the power and potential for destruction in big tech. Raiders of the Lost Ark is anti-Nazi. The characters in Psycho are trapped in a world of gender stereotypes, and we watch Marion choose her own interests over doing the right thing to her literal death. The Lord of the Rings, my favorite film series, emphasizes over and over again how our heroes will refuse that ring and refuse the absolute and unchecked power. Toy Story, the animated film, shows the toys being taken from their home and terrorized by Sid in really cruel and inhumane ways. Addresses ageism, colonization, and exploitation. The proposal's entire premise is based on how U.S. law works and who's allowed to live and work in the country. And that's a rom-com. It's a political rom-com. Basically, there are cathedrals everywhere for those with the eyes to see. And that wraps up the 3rd episode of Cinematic Conversations with me, myself, and I. Thank you so much for listening or watching, and be sure to like and comment some feedback so I can improve for next time or give me some ideas. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you can see the next episode as soon as it drops. See you next time.